on this Sunday night, agonizing anniversary. The humanitarian toll after 3 months of conflict in the Middle East.
This is a conflict that could easily metastasize.
As weapons of war continue to take innocent lives, concerns of a wider conflict take center stage in Qatar.
Iran's regime has a long history of trying to intimidate members of the diaspora.
Accusations Iran is ramping up its campaign to silence Iranian Canadians on a tragic anniversary. This weekend blast of winter, too little, too late? Concerns for the coming year after a hot and dry 2023.
We had to fight for 12 years to become gender equal.
And how a Canadian Olympic canoeist and her dad are smashing ceilings in sports.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Today marks 3 months of bloody attacks in Gaza after Hamas's strike on October 7th that, according to the Israeli government, killed 1,200 people and kidnapped an estimated 240 others. That same day, Israel declared war against Hamas before launching its all-out assault. Since then, life and security on both sides of this conflict has been upended. For Israelis, the fear of waking up to militants. For Gazans, the reality of losing family members as they sleep. The world's underlying worry right now, 3 months in, that this war could spread. The U.S. Secretary of State arrived in the Middle East today to warn countries in the region that this conflict could easily escalate. Antony Blinken says most people in the Middle East want peace, and too many people in Gaza have died. And a warning, you might find our coverage tonight disturbing. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, almost 23,000 people have been killed since the war began. The United Nations says 2/3, or some 70% of those killed in Gaza, are women and children. According to UNICEF, Gaza has become a graveyard for more than 5,000 children. Doctors Without Borders says more than 100 children are being killed each day. The United Nations also says 85% of the Palestinian territory's population is now displaced and that cases of disease are rapidly rising and nutrition is plummeting. Israel will face the International Court of Justice this week on accusations it's committing genocide in Gaza, which Israel rejects. But as Redmond Shannon reports, Israel still says it will not stop until Hamas is totally eliminated.
75-year-old Hashim Abul Naga says he's the only person left of his entire family after an airstrike on Rafah in southern Gaza. There are 33 people in the rubble, including women and children, he says, adding that no one in his family was a militant. Is this Blinken's gift to us on his visit, he asks, in reference to U.S. military support for Israel.
Far too many Palestinians, innocent Palestinians, have already been killed.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East for the 4th time since October 7th, speaking with leaders in Jordan and later Qatar, holding talks on the regional spread of the conflict, hostage negotiations and the fate of Gazans.
We are continuing our discussions with the parties and trying to achieve as soon as possible an agreement that can bring a ceasefire and humanitarian relief and the release of the hostages.
We continue to raise with Israel the need to do everything possible to facilitate the provision of humanitarian aid to Gaza. We reject the statements by some Israeli ministers and lawmakers calling for a resettlement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. These statements are irresponsible, they're inflammatory.
The U.S. remains Israel's biggest ally, and Blinken heads there this week treading a diplomatic tightrope. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he won't stop the military campaign until Hamas has been eliminated and all hostages are freed. But Hamas insists the bombing must stop for more hostages to be released. 2 of the latest victims of those Israeli strikes are more journalists. One of them, Hamza al-Dadou, the son of Al Jazeera reporter Wael al-Dadou. In October, Wael's wife, 2 other children and a grandson were killed in another airstrike. What has my family done to Israel? he asks. The Committee to Protect Journalists says 79 journalists and media workers have been killed in this war. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And while innocents continue to be killed in Gaza, there has been a flare-up in bloodshed in the West Bank. An Israeli airstrike early this morning killed 6 Palestinians in Jenin, according to the Palestinian Health Authority. Israeli police say one of its officers was killed in the city when her vehicle was hit by an explosive. And according to the Israeli Defense Force, an Israeli civilian was shot dead in the Ramallah area.
The firekeeper just
Back here in Canada, pro-Palestinian protesters drown out Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow's remarks during the city's annual Mayor's Skate Party. The demonstrators called for freedom for Palestinians and an end to the violence happening in Gaza, demanding a ceasefire. But they largely stayed on the sidelines during the event. In Ukraine, the country endured yet another round of airstrikes from Russia overnight. Officials say at least 11 people were killed by a Russian missile strike, including 5 children in the Ukraine-controlled part of the Donetsk region. In the city of Dnipro, a dozen people were injured from a drone attack. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched 28 attack drones and 3 cruise missiles overnight, but they say air defense systems shot down all of the drones. There are more flight disruptions in the U.S. today after that frightening ordeal on an Alaska Airlines flight. The airline again grounded all of its Boeing 737 MAX 9 jetliners after federal officials in the U.S. indicated further maintenance might be required. The FAA ordered them grounded after an Alaska Airlines flight had a portion of its fuselage blown out shortly after takeoff from Portland on Friday. The plane landed safely with no serious injuries. Alaska had returned 18 of its 65 MAX 9s to service after they initially passed inspection. The FAA says 171 Boeing MAX 9 airplanes will remain grounded until they are all deemed safe. In British Columbia, one person has been found dead after a helicopter crash in the province's mountainous interior. RCMP say the private helicopter was traveling from Calgary to Sycamore on Friday evening when they were alerted of a ping from an emergency locator transmitter about 18 kilometers east of Revelstoke. After 2 days of searching, rescue crews found the wreckage in Glacier National Park. The cause of the crash is under investigation. The victim was the sole occupant of the helicopter. Across Canada today, winter has finally arrived. From blizzards to deep freezes to snow accumulation, much of the country is finally getting a real taste of the season. Abigail Beeman looks at what we can all expect in the months to come.
People in the nation's capital woke up to the first serious snowfall of the season, finally a respectable sprinkling.
They told me Canada is snowy, and when I came here, I found nothing, so where is snow? It's a joke. No, but now it's good.
I'm so excited.
I'm really happy. We got a few centimeters overnight and some more coming today.
Winter has been slow to show up in most of Canada. Sunday's map shows a different story, with weather warnings and statements right across the country, from a blizzard warning in Black-Tickled Newfoundland to a significant snowfall expected on BC's Sunshine Coast. The prairies will see the coldest temperatures this week.
A piece of the polar vortex, the Arctic air that's usually over the North Pole, is going to shift over Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta. Places like Calgary are looking at daytime highs struggling to get out of the minus 30s, overnight lows in the mid-minus 30s, and early morning wind chills potentially pushing toward the minus 50.
The city of Winnipeg warning people to stay safe, with the wind chill making it feel as cold as minus 27 Sunday night. For many, a winter burst is welcome news, like this qualifying event at an Edmonton ski hill for the Alberta and Arctic Winter Games.
We've had to postpone a few events. We're hoping that we can run them maybe later on in the season. We're hoping for some more snow.
The big question for people who live in Ottawa and tourists alike, when will we be able to skate on the canal? Last time, for the first time in its history, the canal was closed all season due to warm weather. Crews are already working to get it open, but it hasn't been cold enough. We need about 2 weeks at least minus 10 for safe ice.
Kind of symbolic of the changing of winter and the fact that we're on track for it not to be opening anytime soon for the second year in a row is pretty depressing. I'd rather, be pleasantly surprised than, have the hopes crushed again.
While other parts of Canada are still waiting for winter, salt trucks are out in BC prepping for a snowy and rainy blast. As for the rest of the winter,
well, February is the real wild card here. We're not really seeing any strong trend either way. I think it'll likely be closer to seasonal, maybe slightly warmer than normal.
But pull out the parkas for now with a colder than normal January. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
The snow is a welcome sight across the prairies as many regions continue to battle historic droughts. 2023 was hot and dry, and the outlook is no better for 2024. As Heather Yerkes-West explains, the situation is so bad that the Alberta government is already warning communities and industry to plan for potential water shortages in the months ahead.
It's a blast of winter, but across southern Alberta, this January snowfall is likely too little and too late.
We know snow is how we got into trouble last year with the drought. The snowpacks were below normal and then they melted early. Well, this year they're below what they were last year.
While much of the country is experiencing drought conditions right now, the situation is most serious across parts of the Northwest Territories and the Southern Prairies, setting the stage for some big problems around the availability of water in the year ahead.
Just before the holidays, we reached out to municipalities across the province because we really wanted to make sure that they were putting plans in place.
Last spring, Calgary enacted restrictions on water use for the first time in the city's history. But with reservoir levels low and the El Nino weather pressures still in play, many forecasters believe this summer's drought could be even more severe.
Lethbridge is very, very concerned about being able to supply drinking water to its residents over this year. And many rural communities that rely on small surface water ponds are in dire trouble.
It's a problem for industry too. 50% of Alberta's water is allocated to farming, but the region is also a major food processing hub.
Food processing is quite intensive and it requires a lot of water. If you don't have any water, you have to cut back on production, and that's the last thing you want to do as a business.
Because production cuts would see food prices climb.
It's not as if we're just in some bad luck. I think there's been a fundamental change to our climate. With warmer temperatures, there's greater demand for that water.
Especially if we see a wildfire season as bad as 2023. Water is a critical resource, and the lack of it could be one of the biggest challenges facing Western Canadians this year. Heather Yerkes-West, Global News, Calgary.
The fallout from Nova Scotia's flooding disaster coming up, why the province's program to help is falling far short. It was last July when flash floods left parts of Nova Scotia unrecognizable. And though it's already 2024, some residents are still waiting for much-needed help. A couple is raising questions about the province's disaster financial assistance program. As Vanessa Wright reports, they have yet to receive a single cent, despite applying months ago.
Before I do anything, after everything is done, it'll be clean again.
For David and Claudette Oxford, coming home doesn't have the same feel or look as it once did. It's been undergoing repairs for the better part of 3 months. It was just one of the many homes to suffer damage from flash floods in Nova Scotia last July.
But this happened so fast. This was a flood that went from 0 water in the basement to 7 feet of water in the basement in under half an hour.
The water engulfing furniture, kitchen items, and everything in their basement, flushing away 40 years of memories in its wake.
Down the basement, you could poke your finger in the wall. It was saturated with water so bad, and the mold was growing on the walls within 2 to 3 days down there also.
The Oxfords applied for the province's disaster financial assistance program last October. They say since then, someone did come to their Bedford home to assess the damage, but as far as financial assistance, they have yet to see a dime.
I'm a little surprised I haven't had something come back in writing or a letter or an email or something, just to say, we've received your claim, it looks like you qualify, and over time, you don't even have to give me a date, but over the next year or the next 6 months, a resolution or whatever will be made.
In a statement to Global News, Nova Scotia's Emergency Management Office says at this time, more than 1,600 applications have been received through the July 2023 Floods DFA program, and more than $4.5 million in payments have been issued. She adds the remaining applications are in various stages of processing, which can take several months.
It's difficult for people to move on with their lives if they don't have any idea, A, is the government going to help them, and B, how much does that entail?
Now, despite paying more than $90,000 in repairs out of pocket, the Oxfords say they still consider themselves to be the lucky ones. That's compared to the other 35 households along the street who saw similar damages but haven't been able to pay for repairs as quickly.
At the end of the day, we were able to do it. I was able to do it. I feel that people who weren't able to do it, it's a whole different discussion.
One that he hopes comes soon for those not as fortunate as them. Vanessa Wright, Global News, Bedford, Nova Scotia.
Ahead, why Iran is banning a Canadian activist's mother from leaving the country. Across the country tonight, there are vigils marking the 4th anniversary of the downing of Flight PS-752 in Iran. All to remember the 176 people on board who lost their lives, including many Canadians, when the Ukrainian passenger plane was mistakenly shot down by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps over Tehran. 55 Canadians and 30 permanent residents were among those killed in the tragedy. And while victims' families still grapple with sorrow 4 years later, the Iranian regime is ramping up its campaign to silence dissidents abroad. Nagar Mojahedi reports.
You don't have to speak Farsi to understand the pain in this mother's voice. The thought of never seeing you again, she says, is driving me crazy. Canadian activist Hamid Esmailion says his mother, Turan Shamsolahi, has been banned from leaving Iran for at least 6 months.
She was in distress. I have heard that she was shivering when she heard the news.
Shamsolahi was stopped at Tehran's airport, as seen here, on her way to Canada to be with Esmailion to mark the 4-year anniversary of his wife and daughter's deaths. Both killed when Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps shot down their flight with 2 surface-to-air missiles.
Canada must stand for justice.
Esmailion believes the ban is a form of revenge for his activism and following his calls for action after a former senior minister of the regime was seen vacationing in Canada.
Islamic Republic always has punished Iranian activists out of Iran by taking their families as a hostage.
Global Affairs Canada posted on X that it is deeply concerned about the intimidation of family members of victims of Flight PS-752.
We appreciate that, but this is not enough.
Iran's regime has a long history of trying to intimidate members of the diaspora.
Human rights lawyer Kaveh Shahru says accounts like this are not unusual, with threats from the regime even on Canadian soil. A recent Global News investigation uncovered reports of hundreds of regime-linked associates living in Canada.
And instead of giving him justice, the Iranian regime is now harassing other members of his family and putting him under threat. It really speaks to how despicable and evil the Iranian regime is.
It was important to have my mom in my side.
While regime-linked insiders are living in Canada, Esmailion's mother can't even leave Iran, denied access to her son at a time when he needs her the most. Nagar Mojahedi, Global News, Vancouver.
Next, the Calgary Olympic family smashing gender barriers in sports. A Calgary Olympic canoeist who broke gender barriers in her sport is speaking out about the importance of fighting for what you believe in. As Carolyn Curry de Castillo reports, Olympian Haley Daniels comes from an athletic family who share stories of the struggle to be accepted.
As an athlete, Haley Daniels knows the hard work it takes to win, but in her case, she had to fight just to compete.
We had to fight for 12 years to become gender equal.
When Haley competed at the Summer Olympics in Tokyo in 2021, she made history. Women's canoe kayak events had previously been excluded from the Games. That year, the sport made its debut.
It was hard to go to training some days when you had no idea if your dream will ever actually come to fruition. You have to believe in a cause even when a lot of people don't believe in it.
This weekend, Haley was speaking at the Female Sports Summit in Calgary.
We can show the growth and the opportunity that's come because of courageous women.
She says there's been some major strides in women's sports, but change is still needed when it comes to equal pay and sponsorship.
According to the International Olympic Committee, everything is gender equal, but just because there's gender equality in terms of representation on the field does not mean that that is equality in terms of how much sponsorship dollars there are.
Her dad, Kimberly Daniels, was at the Tokyo Games too, as the first openly transgender Olympic judge.
My dad lived the majority of her life as someone who she did not feel comfortable being. And it took her until 65 years old to come out authentically. And so if you can do that earlier in your life, it's a lot easier.
Haley describes sport as still having an exclusive element where everything is based on gender lines.
Sport, there's a male category and a female category, and it's black and white. There's no other category.
Both Haley and her dad are encouraging others to have open conversations about gender diversity in sport. She says change takes time, but her family's struggles have proved that it happens.
There's an amazing accepting community of people now, and there's a lot less naysayers. But she's going to have a challenge, but she also has to know there's amazing allies. I'm her ally. I can be there for her. And there's people that believe in her or him or they.
Carolyn Curry de Castillo, Global News.
And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Sunday evening with us. Tonight's Air Canada is Saskatoon, where the city's police service is celebrating a very special retirement. Brian, a 10-year-old German Shepherd, has spent the last 8 years sniffing out evidence, tracking people down, and apprehending suspects as a police service dog. He now gets to spend most of his days going for walks, playing fetch, and chilling by the lake. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.